Leading up to the 2012 London Olympics, Ryan Lochte was considered one of the best swimmers in the world. He had the opportunity to back up what the great Michael Phelps did in Beijing just 4 years prior. Athletes at that top level can do absolutely extraordinary things with their bodies. Impressive, isn't it? Now, to be the best in the world, they also have to ensure that everything they do contributes to their performance. So that then begs a question. Does this contribute to elite swimming? My name's Jordan Andersen. I came here to the University of Sydney to conduct my PhD in order to answer some of these questions and shine some light over the best ways that we can ensure that athletes can be as successful as possible in their sport. The title of my thesis is Movement Characteristics of Elite Swimmers, Guidelines for Strength Training. Now, in all different types of sports, strength training is a very common strategy to supplement skill training. We know that it increases power, speed, as well as force production. Now, with other sports, it's pretty straightforward. They compete in the same medium, the same ground that they train in the gym. However, with swimming, the medium from which they generate force off and move through is fluid, it's water. So they have to be able to make their way through this fluid without the benefit of the ground. Now, we know that specificity of training is the most effective way for transference of strength from one activity to the next. Now, that again is a very difficult thing in swimming because we don't really have anything to compare the movement characteristics of the top level athletes from. And so this is what my PhD is about. Our goal is to provide the strength and conditioning and swim world with guidelines that they can follow to ensure that their athletes can maximize their performance best. So the first question that we developed is, what are the movement characteristics of elite swimmers? And so to try to answer this question, we conducted a systematic review. We combined the words swim, swimming, front crawl, freestyle with arms, legs, kick, coordination, kinematics, in an attempt to try to find what the literature already says. Now, what we found is that there's a great focus on the upper body, the arm stroke, which makes sense because it comprises somewhere around 90% of propulsion that swimmers can gain. Now, as we all know, movement is a full body challenge, and it requires coordination of all the different body parts in order to maximize our performance. So that brought us to different questions. What about the torso? What about the different parts of the body? And so this spurred on a question. What is the role of a leg kick in front crawl swimming? Now, through our systematic review, we were able to evaluate this. And what we found is that the role of the leg kick really falls into two different categories. One being the direct role, which is straightforward. It moves the body forward. Now, what's much more interesting is this indirect role. How do we measure it? What is it about? We found that the leg kick also contributes to decreasing drag, and it does this by modifying body rotation. So this allows a swimmer to maintain a more or less horizontal position so they encounter less resistive forces when they're swimming. What was also very interesting, and very little research exists around it, is this idea of energy or force transference through different parts of the body. Now, as mentioned, we need to have coordinated movement in order to maximize performance. So we can look at coordination in timing, sequencing, and amplitude of muscle activation that then results in movement. So again, the questions still start building around this. Well, what does this mean to swimming? What are the answers to these questions for an elite athlete such as Ryan Lochte? And so with movements in the water, the arm stroke generates incredible amount of torque, so rotational force of the different parts of the body. And if the swimmer isn't able to control that and direct that, they're going to be swaying all over their lane. And so through our research, we found a lot of qualitative explanations of the role of the leg kick. So starting from the bottom, it provides torques throughout the body that controls hip roll. Now, this then has to be controlled or managed by muscles of the torso in order for the shoulders to go through an appropriate range of motion to maximize the amount of propulsion that the arms can generate from the water. So with this kind of bottom-up approach, we were then able to have a bit of an investigation. Now, through preliminary work from our lab, we've already found that there are different rolling patterns from the hips all the way up the torso through the shoulders. So as you can see here, the red line represents the hips, and the green line is the shoulders. So it's very easy to see that there's a specific timing, sequencing, and different amplitude of these movements that allow elite swimmers to do what they do. So again, the question is, how are these connected? What controls all of this? And as it comes down to, our hypotheses are around movement patterns associated with the swimmer's ability to generate force from their muscles. So, to the present day, we are looking at a way to, again, find these characteristics of elite swimmers. We have data from elite-level Scottish national team swimmers performing a 200-meter all-out effort. From there, we have joint angles, rolling angles, different torques about the different parts of the body. So our goal now is to analyze that data and have a look to see if there's a coordination between arm to arm, arm to leg, and leg to leg throughout the body. Once we get this atlas of how the athlete moves through the water, we will then be able to inform hypotheses surrounding muscle activation. Because again, movements in the arms and the legs, they have to be controlled by musculature. So we have partners at Porto University in Portugal who are some of the best in the world at collecting underwater electromyography, so that's muscle activation. I'll be traveling to Portugal in the next year to conduct research with our partners there. Again, the hypotheses will be fueled from the data that we have from the national Scottish team swimmers. We'll then look at the muscle activation of the torso and the major movers in the limbs. Once we get this idea, we'll be able to fuel or set up guidelines for strength and conditioning training. So this very evidence-based information of movement patterns we'll be able to hand to coaches. And that's going to be the second step of my thesis. Once we have these empirically developed movement patterns, we'll give these guidelines to experts in the strength conditioning world in swimming. And we will allow these coaches to develop strength-based movements that are based on the movement patterns that we've supplied them. Once we have those set of movements, we're going to test them. We're going to bring in elite athletes to our kinematic lab here on campus, and we will evaluate these different movements. This will allow us to look at similar variables that we looked to in the first step of my thesis, being the kinematics and movements of the limbs, as well as the muscle activation. From there, we'll find a correlation or a connection between step 1 and step 3 of my thesis. This will provide a very robust and strong indication of how coaches should be designing their strength conditioning programs. I'd like to thank my supervisor, Professor Ross Sanders, for his ongoing support, as well as my auxiliary supervisor, Professor Peter St. Clair. Thank you.
Questions? What's your modeling expertise like?
In terms of?
So you're going to get all the kinematic data, and isn't that modeling that you will be required to do to identify what the outcomes are?
No, absolutely. Now this is a very new approach to looking at kinematics and movement patterns in swimming. And so there are several different ways that we can treat the data that we come in. One, as you saw, we can build avatars, and from there we can draw in a timeline what the movements and sequences are. We also look at frequencies, so doing something like a Fourier transformation to look at these different sine waves created by rolling patterns and see if there are any similarities and again, any timing and sequencing of the different movements throughout the body.
Other questions?
Just one question.
Okay.
Wanted to find out, because you're developing guidelines for strengthening exercises, and are you having any plans to go into seeking experts' opinions from the top world top swimming performers or the coaches, for this group of people, because they actually having like a lot of experience in this field.
Absolutely. We do have connections with NSWIS as well as the AIS, and at Porto University, we also work with their elite swimmers and their national team, as well as back in Scotland. So we do have different partners all around the world, and moving into the phase of providing these guidelines to the strength and conditioning world, our goal is to have a two-way conversation. So feedback from them to see what their opinions are of the data that we've come up with, as well as handing to them to see if they can use that into developing these different strength movements. So yes, absolutely, it'll be a kind of a 360-degree approach.
I've got one more question. In the third part of your approach, you're bringing subjects back here for testing. So you haven't got a wet lab here. What are you going to be doing here in your testing?
It will be that strength conditioning side. So with the Scottish team data and the Portugal data, that will be the in-water wet, as you said, component. And then we'll bring them into the gym. So it'll be all land-based that we're collecting the data from here. So with the movement patterns that we observed in the water, those will guide the movements that will then test on the land. Because as you can see in the Ryan Lochte video, I mean, he's throwing around these medicine balls and these kegs and he's flipping tires, and it looks very impressive. But there is little evidence to say that that's specific to swimming. So after we've developed the guidelines, we're going to put them to the test in the gym, in a real-time environment where these athletes would be training.
Okay, so you'll be doing specific strength training in various patterns, and then will you be testing speed in the water, times? How will you be evaluating the effectiveness of your strength training program?
At this point, my investigation isn't necessarily into a strength program. It's more specifically the guidelines and the principles to provide coaches so that they can take the reins and develop their own program, but their movements will be informed by real-time data from the water. So